Hello and welcome to Presscast. I'm Farbs, and in this episode, I will be speaking with Christopher Bernadel, a member of Haiti's Black Alliance for Peace, about Haiti's current political crisis, decades of foreign occupation, and much more. Stay with me. Thank you very much, Mr. Bernadel, to join the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. I was meaning to have you here like 2 weeks ago, but there was problem getting you here. But I'm really happy to have you here finally. And so let's start with the situation in Haiti. I mean, if I'm not wrong, it's been about 20 days since President Moise was assassinated. So bring us up to speed. What's happening right now? Do we know who is behind it?
Well, that's the thing. The investigation has been very confusing, and there hasn't been solid evidence or an investigation that's been clear to the public to describe what happened, who was responsible for the assassination.
So,
But
okay, what is happening right now? What's the situation like? Um, because my audience and me myself know very little about the politics down in Haiti. So, just give us as much information as you can, possibly.
okay, so the organization that I'm a part of, the Black Alliance for Peace on the Haiti and the Americas Committee, on July 6th, we released a press release talking about the situation in Haiti up until that point. Up until July 6th, the Haitian people had been protesting for the last 2 years. The Jovenel Moïse government had been in power and had decided to stay on in power after their constitutional mandate. And they had been ruling the country by de facto for over a year at that point, where the parliament of the country had been dismissed, high court judges had been arrested, there had been a growing level of violence in the country, and there had been protests, manifestations that had been in the streets of the capital city, protesting against everything from the Petrocaribe embezzlement or corruption that started in 2018 to protest against the massacres and violence and state-sponsored massacres that had been happening in the poor and working class neighborhoods of the capital city. So the Black Alliance for Peace made a press release about the situation where the United States, the UN, and the Organization of American States have been supporting Jovenel Moise's unconstitutional hold on to power and supporting his government in organizing a unconstitutional constitutional referendum. Um, After the assassination of Jovenel Moise, we've seen the continuation of UN, US, and OAS influence over the political system of Haiti. Immediately after the assassination of the president, Helen Lalim, who was in charge of the UN mission in Haiti, came out and they, after a closed door meeting, announced that Claude Joseph, who had been appointed prime minister by Jovenel Moise, but was due to be replaced by a new appointee, the sixth appointee under Jovenel Moise, Ariel Henry. Helen Laline came in and, after this meeting, announced that Claude Joseph would be the president until elections to be held in the fall. And then, about a week or so after that, the United Nations and the United States and the international or quote unquote international community put their support behind Ariel Henry to be the prime minister of the country and to form a government. So this has been a very confusing situation for the people of Haiti. The people of Haiti, the Haitian state, is in an extra constitutional situation where the constitution doesn't have clear outlines for how things are to proceed. And we can see the continuation of foreign influence and foreign domination over Haitian's government, over Haitian domestic policy, because we see the UN, the OAS having a large influence over who is deemed to be the legitimate holder of power in the country. And they are pushing still now for them to form elections or to have elections in this upcoming fall.
Chris, As I understood, Mr. Moise was not popular with the people before his assassination. So, and you said that he was being supported by the West. Well, I mean, by the United States and the UN, West from our standpoint. Uh, and so the question is, if he wasn't as popular and then he was being supported, because I read that the prime minister he's now accusing foreign agents of being behind the assassination. So who is actually benefiting from this assassination? Who's done it?
Well, we can't say who carried out the assassination, who is directly responsible. But what we can say is that this has not been in the interest of the Haitian people, that the hunger and insecurity and just the lack of infrastructure for public health, safety, education that was missing in the country is still missing in the country. The Haitian people had been protesting against the embezzlement of the Petro-Caribe Fund, over $2 billion of that fund, which was meant to help the Haitian people develop the country, develop the infrastructure, so that they could, they could have recovered more successfully from the earthquake of 2010 and develop some of the things that are missing in the country now. That money was embezzled by the PHTK, the ruling party of which Jovenel Moise is a member, starting with Michel Martelly, who was the hand-picked um, candidate picked by the United States Department of State when Secretary Hillary Clinton was in charge, picked by her to be the runner-up candidate in the elections after the 2010 earthquake in 2011. And Michel Martelly handpicked Jovenel Moise to be his successor. So the situation, the political situation in Haiti right now, we can see a direct line to U.S. foreign policy, to the policies of the United Nations, and to the OAS. This regime that was in power um, was responsible for the embezzlement of over $2 billion, and the people were calling in protest over that to have an investigation. They were calling for Jovenel Moise to respect the Constitution and to step down when his mandate was complete on February 7th. And they're calling for a return to democratic rule in the country, and for a people's transition, a transition that would allow the democratic forces in the country, the grassroots organizations in the capital, to organize the people, or in the capital and around the country, to organize the working people, the masses of people in Haiti who are suffering from unseen levels of violence and poverty up until this point. Allow for those people to come together and have their own democratic process, free from foreign influence, free from foreign intervention. But what we can see now is a continuation of what has been going on in Haiti for some time,
So is
foreign
this part of the
domination
things
of
that
their
you do
policies.
as part of this committee for Black Alliance for Peace? So what exactly does your committee do here helping the Haitian people?
Black Alliance for Peace Haiti and the Americas Committee focuses on Haiti and the Latin America, the Caribbean, and we focus on an anti-war, anti-imperialist position where we speak out against U.S. intervention, imperialist intervention into these countries to control their affairs, to dominate them. And as we've seen in Haiti, for example, in the 2004 UN occupation that still continues today under um, Binu, as we saw in the 2004 coup against President Jean-Bertrand Aristide, and even if you go further back to 1915, under similar pretext, the U.S. invaded Haiti and occupied for 19 years. So the Black Alliance for Peace, our mission is to reinvigorate the Black radical tradition with its anti-imperialist position, and to stand up with our allies, the Haitian people, and fight against U.S. intervention. For example, when we see calls in the media, like we did after the assassination of Jovenel Moise, when we see calls or press reports that say that the Haitian people are asking for intervention, or that Haiti asked for U.S. intervention, The government in Haiti at this moment is not a legitimate representative of the interest of the Haitian people. It is not a constitutional government. The government had not had parliamentary elections to have representatives of the people in place, and Jovenel Moise had been ruling by decree for some time. So this call for occupation, this call for the U.S. to become involved in the investigation into the affairs of the Haitian state after this situation is just more of the same. Claude Joseph, who was in place right after the assassination, has a history of being tied to the National Endowment for Democracy back in 2003 in the time of the coup against Jovenel Moise. And Ariel Henry was appointed by Jovenel Moise even though there was no functioning parliament. So all of these actors that we see now stepping up are not acting in a constitutional manner, and the Haitian people right now are calling for a democratic transition, a people's transition, and for the space to allow them to develop their own system democratically, where they can be the ones to decide how the country will move forward. And they're calling for sovereignty and independence in this time. And at the Black Alliance for Peace, we support them and we call on, all the supporters of the Haitian people to stand up against occupation and further intervention.
In our brief talk so far, you have mentioned foreign occupation several times. So we want to talk about it right now. So before we talk, I was reading about Haiti. So please correct me if I'm wrong, but um, Haiti is the first Black republic which gained independence, and I think it got it 1804 from France. And right after that, the United States just maybe from the fear of its own slaves, back then it was having its own slaves, um, kind of started to just impose its will on Haiti from back then and going on until today. I mean, 200 years. So it's the Haitian people are not. It's nothing new to them, but still they're fighting against it. It's very powerful, right?
Yes, exactly. So, even before the success of the initial revolution in Haiti, George Washington was writing to the French, offering, support in resisting or, squashing the rebellion that turned into a revolution. Um, and Haiti was the first country to be embargoed by the United States, who did not recognize Haiti's independence until the late 1800s. Also, a indemnity, a debt was placed onto Haiti and enforced with gunboats by France for the loss that the former slavers lost, or the financial costs that they suffered due to the revolution of our ancestors on the island. So from the very beginning, Haiti has been, a leader for this hemisphere in fighting against imperialism, against colonialization, against slavery and white supremacy. And from that very moment, they've been punished or made to suffer for their resistance. And so we need to, stand up with the Haitian people in this time when they are they have an opportunity and they want to develop a new system, a system that allows for real democratic sovereignty so that the people can decide the future of their nation.
Powerful. Um, so my question is, do we know that if the United States is anyhow responsible for this assassination in any terms? Can we trace it back to the United States?
And, well, we don't know who is responsible, but if we look at all of the actors, everyone that's been involved, we see all have ties back to U.S. intelligence services. For example, the DEA was cited when the people were entering the building, and we found out now that some of the people who took part or allegedly took part in this assassination were DEA informants. And again, we know that nothing happens in Haiti without the US knowing about it, without the UN knowing about it. We can't say who is responsible, but we can say that now in this situation, the status quo, the ruling classes, the political class in Haiti, and the imperialist powers that support them are moving for, to stabilize the situation in their interest and not in the interest of the Haitian people.
Has this treatment, this Americans treatment, changed during different administrations? So, I mean, was Trump any different than Biden? Was Biden any different than Obama?
Well, if we look back, to the period of the earthquake in Haiti, uh, the Obama administration was in charge then, and they directly intervened to make sure that the candidate of their choosing was in the final phase of elections and eventually came to power. And that regime that took power, the PHTK, they were supported by the United States the entire time. And Jovenel Moise, the only way that he was able to stay in power, staying past his constitutional mandate, not having parliamentary elections, the only way he was able to maintain power was through US support. And that's of both the Clinton and Trump administration. If we go back to the Bush, the 43rd, uh, that administration was responsible for the coup against Jean Bertrand Aristide, where U.S. Marines showed up to his house in the middle of the night and kidnapped him and took him to the Central African Republic. So we can see, regardless of its Democrats or Republicans, we see that the U.S. policy of imperialism, of foreign domination, of making sure to dominate the Caribbean and Haiti for many reasons, geopolitical reasons, resource reasons. They have continued on with the same policy. And so it's going to be up to the Haitian people to break with that and to establish a system where they can have sovereignty over the country.
So, what does this new assassination means long term to Haiti?
Well, I can't really say what's going to happen long term. What we see coming on the ground now are efforts to organize different groups, different grassroots organizations, political organizations, religious organizations, workers' organizations, all coming together to try to come up with a democratic solution, and struggle against the status quo, which has been, for the last, uh, you know, since 2004 has been direct control of the country by the UN, the United States, the European powers, and the OAS, through the core group and the UN missions. So, in order for us not to see more of the same, the United States, the UN, and the OAS have to, be forced to take a different position. The people stood up and fought against the coup and the UN occupation, and they're standing up now. So their allies, like ourselves and all those around the world who support the Haitian people, should stand up and call for, an end to foreign intervention and occupation in the country.
So, do the people of Haiti, do you have an alternative, a politician or a leader, someone who can, who the people trust to come and take the control of the country? Is there such a person available in Haiti?
Well, I won't say there's a person or, one group. This is a process, a democratic process in Haiti has been interrupted many a times. Their elections have been overturned by foreign powers. The first democratically elected leader of the nation, Jean Bertrand Aristide, faced two coups, one in the early 90s and one in 2004. And, there are many other political forces and organizations on the ground that are trying to develop and build the solution. There has been conferences in the country where different groups have come together in these past weeks and are trying to come up with a solution. But the politicians that we see in the opposition, the official bourgeois opposition, um, they still play into the same system of neocolonialism. The political classes in Haiti have been ruling the country on behalf of a very, very small economic and political elite in the country that has been running the country's affairs in the interests of these foreign powers. If we go back to, the 90s, where Haiti was forced to accept neoliberal policies that eliminated their domestic rice production, that eliminated the Creole pig, both of which were staples that allowed for the Haitian people to be able to feed themselves. We see that foreign intervention and foreign domination has not helped the country, and the political elite have not stopped that from happening. And so the only solution is to have a people's government, a sovereign government of the people, democratically, a democratic system that's set up by the people of the country. And the only way for that to develop is if the United States, the OAS, the UN, the core group, which is a group of um, foreign diplomats from the US, Spain, other European countries, France, Canada, and representatives of the UN, for those actors to not force their will on the Haitian people, to not force elections before the Haitian people are able to set up a transitory process and allow the Haitian people to exercise democracy, practice democracy, and to organize a transition.
I got one more question, and then I will let you go. One of the most burning issues of today's world right now is the COVID-19 pandemic,
Yes.
and I've read that Haiti has been hit very hard by that. So, what's the situation like there right now?
Well, the vaccines, there were not vaccines delivered to the country, and early on there weren't the level of cases that we saw in other nations, but that has been changing and the level of cases have been rising. And so Haiti is still in a situation where they're trying to get a handle on this. But because the institutions of the state have been systematically destroyed, um, the response is limited. And so right now it's still in a very precarious situation.
Okay, that was great having you here with us, Christopher. So I just want you to end the show for us. Say your ending words, whatever you want our audience to hear from you.
All right. Well, the allies of the Haitian people should call on, the United States, the United Nations, the Organization of American States to allow for the Haitian people to be able to have a democratic process and to allow them to exercise sovereignty. S- Forcing elections or rushing to elections in the state that the country is in now is not in the interest of the Haitian people, and it's not what they're asking for. They're asking for a transitory system to be set up and give them time to allow a process to be set up so they can have free and fair elections. They don't believe that under the current conditions that they'll be able to have those free and fair elections. So the Black Alliance for Peace calls on foreign intervention to end and for an end to occupation of the country.